you to Kim Thomsen, who's from Chairo Christian College, and James LeFevre, who's from VCASS, and they're going to kind of run you through all the changes that are occurring as we look at music composition as distinct from music styles and composition. So a little change of emphasis here.
You be a button pusher.
No, I can. Hey, thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate coming along. Quick show of hands who's currently teaching 3/4 styles or 1/2 styles. And a whole bunch of people who are interested in composition for next year. Maybe. That's exciting. Well, we can skip that because we had the introduction. Sort of 4 things we're going to hit on. We're looking at the study design. We're going to have a quick look at that and make sure that we're all on the same page, pun intended. What's involved with assessments, a bit of an overview of what's changed, what's in, what's out, and then see how we go at the end. There might be some time for some sharing of ideas and maybe some questions. So just in case you hadn't realised, there is a new study design coming out being implemented in 2023. It's important that we know that. It's important also that you engage with the resources from the VCAA. So whether it be the study design, some of the videos that Mark Arnold's put together as well, and a really, really big disclaimer that we're not the VCAA. We're here talking about, as 2 people who teach the subject, well, you're an assessor with it as well, but we are not the VCAA. There is one place to go for everything you need to know, but we're going to have a chat about some of the things that you might find useful. So, some of the things that we do in music composition.
Okay, these are some of the things, as you can see, that we do in music composition. I think the thing I want to get across today, particularly if you're not teaching it, is what an awesome subject it is. It's really accessible to a range of students, variety of learning styles, variety of musicianship and music skills. Kids can achieve here that might feel intimidated in a performance setting, or equally may feel intimidated, might be a great performer and can't actually, particularly coming out of the last couple of years, get up in front of an audience just yet, or have that confidence to produce, their work in front of examiners. So this subject allows them to be creative, allows them to explore music, allows them to discover music, allows them to create music. It allows them to be creative. It allows them to have, improvise, arrange, and all these skills that they're going to take with them, whether it be as a composer or whether it be as a performer or as both those things, just in general with the music. And it's a really accessible course. It's not hard to teach, and it's really open to students being creative and doing a lot of directed learning that they can do themselves. So you're just giving them some tangibles to hang on to, and then they can go along and do their compositions and be really creative, and most of them very, very successfully. It's also, with some of the things that have changed that we'll look at with James in a moment, 50% is the best thing that's happened to this subject, and I believe actually across all the study designs, having everything as the last major work at 50% of the, whether it be the performance, the inquiry portfolio or the composition, is really equitable across all the subjects, but also gives those kids the ability to demonstrate their work really successfully and achieve really, really good marks. So obviously, common to, you may or may not be aware, these are the things that are common to all units and upon the key knowledge, for all units of the, across the study itself. So they create their own music. Audio and notated formats. Notation is subject to the type of music that they are doing. So there is no point in a kid that is doing some wonderful technology piece of music and computer-driven music providing, traditional notation with that. That doesn't give a true replication of what the work is that they've done. So don't try and make it notation or traditional notation where you've got saws and things writing down in ledger lines that nobody is ever going to be able to read. Present that work in the format that is relevant to the genre. Okay, so if they are composing a full symphony orchestra, yep, we want to see Sibelius scores and I'm going to say AMU scores, but that's funny. Muse scores. All those sorts of things. Yes, traditional notation, but that doesn't need to be across the board for all genres, and it definitely doesn't need to be across the board for electronic music. So just some clarity there on that.
New in this study design, or maybe bolstered a little bit, is there's a whole bunch of terminology and definitions which, when I looked at, I found really, really useful. So if you haven't spent some time, pages 14 to 19 of the study design, I strongly recommend that you do go and spend some time there. There's some really helpful definitions. Something like this that's obviously relevant to composition for next year. It was really great to see that, okay, so there's a definition of the compositional devices: repetition, transition, variation, and contrast. Transition's new, but we'll talk about that a bit more later. But then also what that actually could be. It's not an exhaustive list, it's not everything, but there's some really, really fantastic things in there, which would be a great spot for starting with a bit of a checklist and making sure that you've got those things covered in your course somewhere. Did you want to talk about that one anymore?
Just a little bit on that. If you have a look at those few words in the study design, how easy to create lesson plans and assessment tasks off that. It's very, very accessible and approachable from a teaching perspective and a learning perspective. So when you're developing your course and you're developing the student work, you're taking some of these key words that will come into the key skills in a moment, but we take some of these key words, it's really easy for students to achieve in this particular subject.
And yeah, just to be clear, we'll talk about compositional devices quite a bit throughout the key skills and knowledge. So take a moment, take a mental photo of those four terms: repetition, transition, variation, and contrast. The other thing that we're going to talk about quite often is this thing called an EAT.
Okay, so the EAT is the externally assessed task, which all of you would have been made aware of from this morning, that there are going to be several EATs coming across. With the EAT, that currently is Unit 3 work and Unit 4 work going off to external assessors to be examined, and then obviously marks come back. For next year, it will only be the Unit 4 work, which I think is actually really beneficial to the student learning and for the teaching of this particular component. So the EAT task is the documentation that supports the creative process of the actual composition. So one, that legitimises the work, and we'll come into what the documentation looks like a little bit later on, but it legitimises the work so we can see that the student's work is authentic, and that documentation will authenticate that work, and then it also describes the creative process on what they've done throughout their journey to get to the EAT, and then that is then often examined, and that's 50% of their mark.
Unit 3 area of study 1 is creating. That probably sends a pretty good message, doesn't it? Outcome 1, creating. That is literally a screenshot from the study design. Here the students are developing creative exercises in response to characteristics of music studied. So they've studied some things, and here is where the rubber hits the road, and they're actually going to apply that knowledge in their own creative pursuits. Seems like a pretty good model to me. So they create music based on the music characteristics of the studied works. They use elements and concepts. Concepts is a new thing in the study design. Again, refer back to page 14 to 19, and you'll be able to see what that's all about. But they are basing these compositions, these short works, these sketches, all based on the characteristics of the studied work. So we go in detail, in depth, and look at these set works that we're studying, and then we're going to take everything that we've learned, and then, maybe not everything, but aspects of what we've learned, and apply that in our own creative pursuits. We've got some compositional devices there, and then describe the technical or practical factors that influence the creative responses. They document that process with appropriate digital audio format, which we've spoken about, and then use appropriate music terminology.
Just the other thing on that too, you'll notice here in Unit 3 area of study 1, there is only repetition, variation, and or contrast. Okay, the transition that we saw earlier will come in to Unit 4. So they're the key And it's not limited to. It doesn't have to be only those things, because sometimes it's very hard to not include those things. However, they are the things that you're looking at to form your assessment for the Unit 3, and the Unit 3 is going into school-based coursework, so it will be assessed by you guys.
So the SAC, or the School Assessed Coursework for Unit 3, 2 creative responses, short composition sketches, and associated documentation. That 2 creative responses, I sort of see that as being, to be honest, a minimum. I probably want students to be doing a little bit more than just 2. We're still working out at VCASS how we're going to assess this and whatnot, of course. And hopefully later in the year we might get some more guidance from VCAA as well about exactly what that should look like. But you know, when it comes to, it might be the fact that the students just submit 2, but they will have composed many more exercises ideally than what they will have submitted. That's for us at VCASS.
We'll also, just in that, look at the sort of repertoire that you're selecting so that there's plenty to write on. If you give the students good quality work, it doesn't matter what genre that is, they'll have plenty that they can respond to creatively. They'll go, oh yes, I can hear, whether it be the chord progressions, whether it be the tonal colours, whether it be the structure, form. They'll start to develop their own creative responses where they're doing their own compositions in response to the quality of the music that's selected. Okay, so just this again is just the creating side of the teaching and learning. So we're looking at some of the things that we might include into the composition for the students to be assessed on. So the compositional devices, as I said, sometimes it's pretty hard to not include repetition because it's going to be there in one voice and then it's going to appear again in a later voicing, whatever that may look like. But then we start to look at genre specifics. Is it ornamentation? Are we expanding on things through deeper understanding in our learning? So if we understand the Baroque era, we're going to be looking for that implied sort of dynamic contrast. We're going to be looking for the ornamentation. We're definitely going to be looking for certain tonalities and structures. If they're going into a more contemporary genre or they're doing cinematic music, you're going to be looking for very different things in their outcomes. However, if you provide yourself with a really strong rubric, it doesn't matter what the genre is that you're studying, it should come through that the student can achieve all of those outcomes regardless of the genre that's in there. So again, just looking for some of the, and they're the descriptors you're looking at for your own assessment with your cohort. Okay, so you're looking as your ranking tool, how you're going to separate out those kids. Has somebody gone a little bit deeper into their understanding of a genre, or of a style, or of an element, or of a compositional device? How have they treated it? Have they used minimalism? Maybe not quite at this unit, but they may be doing those things, and that is going to be a discriminator for you to go, okay, even though this is a great body of work here with the majority, there's a few that sit here. And that will then help your students in your assessment.
This is sort of just some tips and tricks from having survived it. I call myself a style and composition survivor. Having studied a work in a great level of detail, the students should have a pretty strong understanding of the inner workings of each of those works. And as I said, this whole outcome is really just about applying that knowledge. Massive fan of plan first. My worst nightmare when, okay, we've got some time, I want you to start developing a plan, and the first thing they do is open Sibelius and put instruments in, and it just never ends well. It muddles nowhere, it takes forever, composing by click, not a good idea. So we asked the students to brainstorm how they're going to use the elements, how they're going to use the compositional devices. I mean, they should have all of that because they've studied it in another work that they're trying to replicate in some way aspects of that work. And then we ask them to sketch out ideas. And be discerning about which of the ideas are actually going to make the cut into the final thing. I sort of feel, again, that students should be ideally developing more content than they're actually going to use in the final thing, because I think that's what composers do. At least that's what I've been told. Pencils and recording devices are your best friend. Sitting at the piano with a chord progression, humming melodies over the top, recording that, then going away and notating or trying to work out what that is, I think is a really great approach for a lot of students. And from there, it's really sort of looking at, you've got these core ideas, and then how are you going to arrange those? How are you going to orchestrate those? Manipulate the elements to achieve a particular intention. And really helpful if you take photos or screen grabs along the way. And using a compositional journal is something that we do as well. It really sets the students up when it comes time to actually document the process.
Just on those last 2 points as well, the taking photos and along the way is really awesome. And also kids get lost in their own work because they've got 75,000 compositions opened as composition 1, composition 2, and then they can't find their original composition. Have them label it. If it's composition 1, give it a name and just it's draft 1, draft 2 of the same name, so that they can find it, date it, so that they know at least this is the last time I worked on this piece. And sometimes they go off on a totally different tangent and they come up with some great ideas. They don't want to lose those first ones, and even if they're not using them now, they might use them in 10 years' time when they go and compose. Hang on to those ideas. That's why I'm saying don't just delete it or cut and paste over the top of it. Keep that idea, just save it as something different or as exercise 1, whatever you're going to call it, and then have them document and date along the way so they don't lose their final copy, because the amount of times kids come in and go, I've lost everything, and it's like, well, hang on, let's just go back a little bit and we'll go back through the stages and find the one that you're actually looking for. And the compositional journal, we have to write quite a large documentation in Unit 4, as I said, for discerning the work, making sure that we validate the work. They get used to just dot pointing along the way. It is so helpful for them writing that document at the end, and from an assessment point of view, so clear. To actually read students' work where they say, I wanted to write for a rock band. I since found out that the bass guitar can't play down to low B flat or something to that extent. And so I workshopped that. My mate told me they can't do that, so I took that out and then I put it up an octave or whatever they did. It validates their work, it shows the creative process, and they're doing it as they go. It just needs to be a dot point along the way, and then they've got next to nothing to do when they hit Unit 4, because they just then consolidate that journal.
So that was outcome 1, creating.
Well, we've crossed over a little bit into some of the
did.
others.
It's not a straight line today. Unit 3, area of study 2, is analysing for composition. Students explore 2 short works or movements or collections of minor works in different styles, and one of those works must be created by an Australian composer since 1990. They look at how music is organised through oral and or visual analysis of the treatment of music and elements, concepts, compositional devices, repetition, variation, contrast. There it is again. They learn a lot about those pieces of music.
And they demonstrate that back in the first one. So what they've learnt in studying this genre, as I said earlier, it might be that they're then putting in ornamentation, that they're then putting in, some jazz harmonies if they're doing a jazz work or something like that. So we actually see what they've studied reflective in their creative outcome in composition 1.
Music terminology, and they develop a folio design brief. I'm not sure what that looks like yet.
That hasn't quite come out yet.
But it's not a huge thing, and I think we'll all be fine. Identify, describe, discuss treatments of elements, music concepts, compositional devices, describe ways in which works are selected and representative of particular music styles. That's always a fun one. Describe ways in which unity and diversity can be achieved in a coherent music work. Describe music materials developed. Reflect on the studied works and how they might use that in their own creative processes. Appropriate terminology, musical examples, analysis, and development of a folio design brief. So there's 2 parts that are assessed there. There's an analysis of the 2 selected works, one of them Australian post 1990. Now, that can be presented as a written report, written responses to structured questions, or a multimedia report. So that's a slight change. And then the other thing is that folio design brief.
Just on that, I think the design brief too will be what is compiled by the students for you to do your analysis. Is that right, Tim? Yeah. So it will be all of that put into that folio, and that will be your analysis work. Tim Doug will stand at the back here. Tim's part of the panel that is actually writing that folio work. So welcome, Tim. In the written report and the responses to structures and the multimedia, that is a change, and that's quite a welcome change too, because it allows for the diversity in learning and the students' different skills and strengths in their learning styles to then actually be successful in the way they present that work to you for assessment. So, some of the questions this morning were really, really constructive questions. This is the kind of subject, and actually I think the fact that we now have the 4 musics as well, that allows for a lot of diversity in student learning. So you can actually, even though it is work and there is going to be some teething problems, I'm sure, I do think there is a greater option here for students to be more successful than the old study design. So all of those things that you're experiencing coming out of COVID, whether it be anxiety, whether it be lack of performance, tuition face-to-face, where the kids have got different holes in their learning or whatever it might be, these are the areas where those kids are going to be successful now, because there is been a lot of work and consideration to learning styles, learning needs, and how students can access the musics, any of the suite, across the board more successfully.
We had a bunch of students who started composing in the lockdowns because they didn't have anyone to make music with. So I think that there's hopefully, fingers crossed, going to be more students taking composition next year. That one's you.
Okay, so we're just looking at the analysing here. So we're just designing questions that might prompt a response. Okay, so just think really considered about those questions, and there will be examples in the study design when that comes out next year anyhow. But just having good prompts in there will assist the student to respond to what they hear. Kids hear really well. And one thing that's happened in the study design too, that I think is very welcome as well, is at the front there is a great glossary, which has not been there ever in the past. And so you have language and terminology that you can take straight out of the study design and give to students across all of the musics. So they've already got a better chance of succeeding. So then once they've demonstrated that knowledge, they can then talk more in depth about how the elements are treated. What are some of the treatments of the elements, and what are they hearing? As I said, they hear great. They don't necessarily have the language to get it out of their head. So what they hear is awesome. We've got to give them some tools so that they've got those prompts to be able to write down what they hear and respond to what they hear successfully. As I said, the study design has loads of great things in there now. Key words, get them to go through what they know and highlight some key words. When you're doing your Unit 3, give them some prompts. I'm wanting you to do structure, I'm wanting you to do dynamics, I'm wanting you to do articulations. They're the things I want you to listen for in this example. Which words did you highlight? Make sure you use that language. They can have it there for Unit 3. Use your language that you identified with, that you're going to have a great deal of success in responding to. Okay, these are the 3 that we have in Unit 3. So you will hear lots of repetition, variation and contrast. They're the 3 main, they're by far not the only ones, and there's lots more in the study design as well, but they're the 3 you're going to hear continually that you're looking for when assessing work. So as I said, it can be pretty hard at times to leave some of those out. So tell the students what these are, give them again some key words to look for in there, so when they're constructing their own work, they're aware of the assessment side too, because as composers, you've got to remind your young composers that it's still a VCE subject, which the VCE is a ranking tool. So they still have to actually sit to criteria, not just their creative juices flowing as they would. So we want them to have every success in achieving the best they can in this space. So whilst they are young composers and we want to nurture that and encourage that, refer them back to few key things where they're going to actually be ranked fairly and have the best opportunity to succeed in that space. So these are the 3 main ones that we have, as I said, in Unit 3, and they're expanded upon and added to in Unit 4.
So one of the ways that you can assess this outcome is through structured questions. I sort of giving this some thought, this whole notion of sort of being able to create a ranking across your cohort of students, thinking about questions that have different levels of achievement, open-end questions. I mean, to be honest, when you sit down and you read students' work, it tends to be pretty diverse, I find, anyway, given the open nature of what they're listening to. But, a level 1 question, identify how use of dynamics and articulation. Describe the use of repetition in this work. Describe the form, structure, and the texture of the work. Some of those things, really thinking about how the elements might kind of pair up nicely. Often finds that can help students in this Unit 3 level sort of guide them towards really what it is that you actually want them to listen to. Level 2 question, discuss how the harmony and melody of the work contribute to the creation of character. Find, discussions of harmony probably allow some of those students operating at a higher level to be able to present more detailed analysis. Describe how contrast is used to create interest. Creating interest is always contentious, but it's there. Level 3 question might be describe how melody and contrast are used. So you've actually taken an element and a compositional device, and you're asking the students to respond to that. Describe how variation is used to create unity and cohesion in the work. Discuss how the elements and concepts of music are used idiomatically of the style. So there are some, certainly not all. There's many different other things that you might want to explore. And to be honest, when you are having these studied works, if you are going to take a structured question approach to this outcome, then you probably want to really think about what the work that you've actually selected is, and ask questions where the students are going to be able to experience success there.
Just on those things there too, just be aware of those 3 words: identify, discuss and describe. They are very different. Identify is really just 1-2 word answers, okay? If you are going to then describe, you're going to have a little bit more information on your 1-2 word answers, so you might have a sentence. Discuss, we're looking for an in-depth demonstration of knowledge. So those 3 words are relevant to what you're teaching and what the students are displaying.
A couple of learning activities you might like to think about. Obviously, we listen to a lot of music. That's good. In-class discussion, awesome. Score analysis and annotating scores, good. Get out the highlighters and the coloured pencils. Vocab lists and glossary is really important. Jigsaw activities is one that we love to do at VCASS, where we're kind of fortunate because we've got 30 students taking, at the moment, styles and composition, which is great. So we'll have a work that we're looking at and team people up, and you're going to be the expert in articulation. Everything we need to know about articulation in this piece, go. You're going to be the expert in dynamics, and then they report back that kind of It's an old school method, but it works. Quizzes we use, looking at how we can actually represent music through graphs and tables, and that visual representation of sound can be useful for some students as well. Really important though that when you are selecting your 2 study works, it's essential that the works that are selected allow students to develop their understanding of the key skills and knowledge. So it's no good just having one work that Philip Glass, lots of repetition and something, and then something else that has lots of repetition. You need to get diverse across the 2 of them. Having contrasting works is probably a good idea. But in saying that, each of the works should be able to stand up on its own as well. Make sure that one of those works is Australian post-1990. And yeah, as I said, there's lots to talk about with the different elements and the concepts of music, compositional devices, style, unity, diversity. Area of study 3, responding. This is probably the part of the study design that looks most like it was, and that's okay. That's good. I'm happy with that. So this is where students are going to listen to music and analyse that and form and present critical responses. So this is like here's a piece of music, tell us all about it, respond to these structured questions. So key skills in there. Music from a range of styles. Really, really important that our young composers are listening to a lot of different things. They'll never know that they're a bad copy of something until they've heard it. So a range of styles is really, really important. They need to be able to highlight compositional devices in what they're hearing, and discuss ways that the elements of music contribute to character, use appropriate terminology, and then find different ways of forming and presenting their critical responses. So, some students are going to be writing slabs of text in full-on prose. Some people are going to be writing dot points. Some people are going to be drawing pictures that actually relate to the contour of the melody, for example. There's a lot of different ways. Some people are going to put a line down the middle of the page and talk about 2 different things. And if you're looking at something like, say, variation, here's what it was, there's the variation. Here's what that thing was, here's how it was varied. Some students find that a really useful strategy. So this is assessed at Unit 3 as a SAC, written responses to structured questions. Unit 4 is grey in this presentation. The areas of study are the same. Area of study 1, creating. But there are differences at Unit 4, of course. This is where students are going to compose the work that they're going to send off for the EAT. Okay? So compose a short work or groups of short works using the design brief formulated from Unit 3, Outcome 2. Manipulate the elements and concepts to achieve their aims. They use compositional devices, repetition, variation, contrast, and transition to develop their music ideas. Students explore unity and diversity to create coherent music work through the development of musical material. They record and preserve the work in appropriate digital, notated, and audio formats.
On there, mate. So just before James goes on, you can see now the flow on that's happened through Unit 3. And as James said earlier, doing more than 2 works for their study and their submission is a good idea, because you're sometimes enforcing particular works on them and then telling them to compose to that genre, style, whatever. That's fine, that's developing a skill. That we would love for some of that work to be maybe the basis of their major composition, but it won't necessarily be the case, because it may not be the flavour of music that they want to compose for. So again, knowing your cohort, have music that you think is going to be successful for them to start that original idea, and then that idea can be expanded here. So they just are growing this idea, and it's blossoming and it's thickening and it's getting longer, it's developing, it's got that contrast, it's got repetition. Now you can see that the texture's happening, whether it be in rhythms, whether it's being in the harmony, and we can see that work growing. For you, that is going to be easier to teach and to assess, and for the student, it's going to also set them up where they're expanding on work, not throwing it away and starting again. That said, many of your composers will do that. They will get out of that and start again on their new composition, because they did that and that was fine for that time, but now they've developed a quite different flavour. And they will develop a different flavour, hopefully, because they're learning and they're getting deeper understanding of the content.
Some of them even like to give you heart attacks and decide 2 weeks before the EAT that they've taken this entirely new direction and started again.
And you'll notice this is where transition comes in. And the key with transition now is that we're looking just basically for the kids to now advance their work, go into a new idea without it being too clunky, basically. Not just, I created 2 pieces of music that don't work together because I've stuck this onto the end of Unit 1. We want that transition to actually, be, whether it be quarterly, whether it be in a verse chorus type thing, whatever it might be, growing. Oh, sorry, mate.
No, that's fine, because I don't think there's any surprises in there. And of course, everybody's going to go and read the study design anyway. So, now this is Unit 4 is assessed. Outcome 1 is assessed, externally assessed task. Submit a folio that contains an original work or group of short works, and then the Outcome 2 part that we're going to get to in a moment is the recordings and the documentation that support that. But just quickly, when it comes to composing these works, again, I think it's really, really important that students have an idea of where they're going. It might not be where they end up, but having an idea of what they're trying to do as a starting point. So having some sort of idea about a creative intention, whether that be some particular styles that they're inspired by, whether that be a particularly a motive thing that they're trying to achieve, or an experience that they're trying to represent in sound. I think that's a really, really great catalyst as a starting point and helps give some clarity. We ask the students at VCASS to actually give some thought to what the structure of this thing is going to be, and what sort of instruments you're going to be using, and then again, go away and develop content ideas and be discerning about what makes the cut when it comes time to shape this thing up. Pencils, recording devices, please. And we actually ask students at VCASS to submit a relatively solid plan, whether that be like a grid where each instrument is detailed and they're going to tell us who's got the melody, who's got the accompaniment, what that accompaniment might be. they never stick to it, but that's okay. It's a launching pad, it's a starting place, and from here, because I think for some students, the blank canvas can be really, really confronting. So having some simple ideas that they can then go on to expand upon, hello variation, hello repetition, that's a good thing. And we actually ask students at VCASS to submit a draft each week when we get to okay, here we go, it's composing time. And those students will submit something each week. First step is just squiggles, drawings, words, mind map. From there, they might have maybe a Sibelius file or an audio recording of them at the piano with some ideas, right through to here's a draft score, and they'll probably put in 4 or 5 different versions of that draft score, adding more detail, adding to along the way. We're really, really fortunate at VCASS. I said we've got about 30 students, but we've got 2 teachers teaching that as well. So we've got about 15 each, which is great for sanity. Really important that we use peer feedback quite a bit as well. So students are working with those people that they're comfortable with, providing feedback for each other. We sometimes get external composers to come in and spend some time with the students as well, which is really, really great. But one-to-one conferencing happens a lot. Sometimes they'll submit something to like a Google Classroom thing, and then we'll have a listen and provide written feedback. You know, it's a bit time-consuming, bar 14, trombone. Interesting choice in the notes there. Can you tell me a bit more about what you were going for? But what I've discovered, and this is a product of the remote learning period, is a Loom video or similar screen record. Amazing. I'll literally have their file open in front of me, and I'm hovering my cursor over the top of things, going, I'm a little bit confused here. Maybe the piano voicing is a little bit too low. It sounds a little muddy. What if you tried this? You can actually show the student how they might be able to come up with something different. So that, see how I just took it up an octave and now it sounds different, and I'm literally playing that sound back to the student watching the video. So that's been a really, really powerful tool. And the great thing is with doing it on Loom, then you're not giving them the answers, because then they have to go away and experiment with it and play around with it as well. But that saves me time and allows me to actually be more detailed as well. So definitely worth playing around with that. Unit 4, area of study number 2, analysing for composition. This is a bit of a change from the current study design, where the students are actually, rather than studying someone else's work, they're actually more looking at their own work. That's cool. So they document the creative process from the composing their original work in outcome 1, using their design brief from Unit 3, outcome 2. They chart their progress from original intention through the development and refinement and final realisation. They include decisions made from the technical and practical factors that impacted on the work, and present a final analysis of their work or works. That includes description of their treatment of elements, concepts, and compositional devices. I don't know about you guys, but we always have those students, oh, why did you choose to do that? Oh, it sounds good. Don't disagree, that's awesome, excellent, sounds great. But can we maybe look at why? That's probably an important thing to understand if you were ever, I don't know, going to try and create that same sound again. So I think that's, from my point of view, a really welcome change.
It's a good point at this time to be reminding your students too, that you can see where the documentation now, if they've got that composer's journal happening all the way through, just dot points, so easy, not a lot of work. Really not a lot of work. They're now actually compiling something for that area of study where they can be chopping and changing the bits that are relevant to be actually responding to in that documentation. And reminding them too, because this is the personal point, that this is a VCE subject and this is not a criticism on your work. This is a wonderful piece of music. This is a wonderful creation, because as creators, they're going to be starting to become quite vulnerable at this point because you're suggesting change with something they may be very happy with, and rightly so happy with. However, it may not be exploiting the best marks for the student because it is a VCE subject. So just taking that little bit of personal element out for them, basically to shelter them a little bit, to boost up, you know, what the assessment task is.
So the key skills and knowledge, elements of music and concepts, compositional devices. The second dot point's a good one. Describe ways in which works selected for study are representative of particular styles. Describe how music material is developed. And then how their creative process worked out and appropriate terminology.
And it's interesting, we've got the, can you go back? Discuss, describe, and identify is the word I was trying to get at. Identity. Identify, they're those three key words again. So we're having assessment tasks that include those three different ways of responding.
So what does it actually look like? Well, there's audio recordings and documentation relating to the composition folio as described in the examination specifications published, what did they say, in December by the VCAA. I think we spoke about all that. Just a couple of examples of some of the stuff that students might include in their documentation. Squiggles, planning. That's somebody got a bit hyperactive with the colour there in their planning, but looks swish. In their annotations, being able to use colour or circles and whatnot to be able to highlight particular features that they're looking for. There's a grab, I think that must be from Ableton or something similar like that, where the students really able to actually quite clearly show the increase in density. So we really encourage students to actually use screenshots as much as possible. Can you go
back to that one, please? Because from an assessment point of view, that is so much more successful than a lot of other ways things in electronic music may be documented in notation. That is very clear where things are building upon ideas, motives, density, tension, all those things. That's a lot more successful than trying to, as I said, either one, copy it out into traditional notation, or two, taking a screenshot or a million screenshots of, each one of those things, or a guitar amp with a volume button, because that actually gets put forward sometimes because kids don't know what to put in for their documentation to support, particularly, music and technology. So we, see some of those things. That is a great representation. You can see the texture, you can see the structure. It's very clear what the student knows what they're doing there. They just didn't put a heap of sounds in and go, yeah, that's pretty cool. They actually have identified learning here.
Hey, one to go. Doing so well. Area of study 3 is responding. Again, listen to a piece of music, tell us all about it. We're analysing here, we're listening for compositional devices, elements of music, understanding various ways music creators use these compositional devices to achieve their aims. Now, that right there, key skills knowledge, range of music styles. Come the end of year paper, could be anything. So our students need to be listening broadly. That's really, really important. Appropriate music technology, how character elicits subjective responses.
Again, we've built in Unit 3 on that language for the students so that they now can actually use music terminology to put those responses in. It's just building on from Unit 3 into Unit 4, not terribly difficult to comprise that, that learning for them, to create the assessment tasks and then for them to succeed in this subject.
So, Unit 4, Area of Study 3, that's a typo. There's a Unit 4 SAC, which written responses to structured questions. And then end of year external examination, 60 minutes. So it's slightly shorter, but the change there is that we're only dealing with compositional devices and elements of music. In the current study design, it's assessing what's currently in area of study 2 or outcome 2. But next year, because that's obviously focused on the students' work, the end of year paper is just looking at outcome 3, key skills and knowledge across Unit 3 and 4. So, sort of spoke about that. Just a little note there as well, and it is similar, I think, in the way that students are going to be documenting and notating their work relevant to the style. I'm a bit of a believer that also that happens when we're responding to different genres of music. So the language that we would use to talk about music from the Baroque period is different to the music, to the language that we might use talking about certain elements of music if we're talking about rock music. And I think that that's a really great leveler for us at VCASS because we have a lot of improv students and repertoire students. It's interesting when we put on something a little bit more contemporary and the harpsichord player tells us about the terrace dynamics in Jimi Hendrix music. Maybe that's not the language that we would actually use to talk about the music of Jimi Hendrix, and that's a really great leveler there. Likewise back the other way. So there's lots, I was looking at this and I go, okay, so what do we actually do to develop students' knowledge and skills in this area? Lots of listening. We have a 45-minute class every week where we'll normally get through one or two different excerpts of music that'll have a particular focus, like we're focused on, okay, we really want to get into the nitty-gritty on repetition here, so we're going to listen to this, and then something in a contrasting genre that still focuses on repetition. Lots of in-class discussion, vocabulary lists, glossaries, good. Mnemonics are really helpful for some students because sometimes they'll hear a piece of music and go, okay, I need to write about melody. Don't know where to start. So having, whether it's an acronym or a mnemonic or something for the students to be able to kind of have as a starting place is really, really beneficial. Also really beneficial when they get to the bit where they're done. I don't know what else to write. Oh, have I spoken about contour? Have I spoken about the range and the register? Have I spoken about tonality? Have I spoken about the structure of the melody? I find mind maps are really great as well. Learning more about instrumental techniques or style is really valuable, so a bit of research there can be good. Score analysis, having a student expert if they're you're Jimi Hendrix again there. If you've got somebody who is a guitarist, loves that music, okay, well, teach us. It's a really valuable, engaging. I promise you, students will probably prefer to listen to their peers than me. Using graphs, tables, visual representation of sound. One of the things I think is really, really valuable is actually asking students to reflect on and edit their own responses. So, all right, we've got 15 minutes. I'm going to play this thing for you 3 times, exam style structure, response. They write it up. Okay, now I want you to go back for homework where you're not rushed with time and use a different coloured pen and add in all the things that you missed. Or go through and could you say what you said in that paragraph in 2 sentences so that you've got more time to move on. One of the most challenging things I think about this style of analysis is the time and making sure that everything that hits the page is scoring, if you like, and you're being efficient. That takes practice. That's probably the biggest thing that we find is 15 minutes to get everything you're hearing onto a page. It's pretty challenging. So that takes repetition and practice. So editing your own responses or having a peer edit your response, really, really valuable. That just means that they're going to be more efficient with their use of the language. Having everybody in the class write something and then pairing up with each other to take their 2 responses and form it into one. And then that duo and that duo meet up and they've got to be a quartet. So they're going to actually build upon, strengthen, edit, challenge each other, discuss things. That type of snowball activity I find is really, really powerful. And the other thing is, it gives me a bit of a chop out in the class as well. I don't have to be the one at the front telling them everything that we're expecting them to know. It's really, really valuable for them to wrestle with it and talk about it amongst themselves as well. In that editing response, quite often we ask students to go back and highlight every time they've used vocabulary. So if we've asked them to talk about articulation and dynamics, okay, grab a colour highlighter. Every time you've used words that actually describe articulation, highlight it. Every time you've used a word to describe dynamics, highlight that. That can be a confidence builder because they actually sit back and go, wow, I've actually got a lot in there. Or it can be a bit of a moment of realization that I've filled 2 pages and I've used my highlighter 4 times. That's a problem. One of the other things I love to do is to put a practical slant on this and get the students to reimagine, buzzword, or compose a work based on a given character or a given style. Okay, so we've got a bunch of nursery rhymes in a hat and a bunch of genres or elements. You pluck out Pop Goes the Weasel and dynamics. Okay, how am I going to take Pop Goes the Weasel and do something interesting dynamically, or Pop Goes the Weasel and melancholy? All right, how am I going to use the elements of music or compositional devices to take this and turn that into something that's melancholy? Again, that's a really great way, fun way, for students to be able to apply their learning in a musical setting, which I'm all for. I probably wouldn't, unless your students are up for it, I probably wouldn't drop it on them and go, hey, guess what we're doing today? Often that'll be next week, this is what we're doing. So you've got a week to develop your arrangement of Pop Goes the Weasel or whatever it is. If we get time at the end, I'm sure you have lots of other ideas as well. So, I thought it'd be useful just to kind of put everything on the one page. That's what assessment in composition Unit 3-4 looks like. So the Unit 3 school assessed coursework accounts for 20% of the study score. With that, we have outcome 1, which is 2 times creative responses and documentation, that's 20 marks. Outcome 2, 2 times analysis of study works, that's 30 marks. Outcome 2 again, a folio design brief worth 10 marks, and outcome 3, written analysis, 20 marks. All of that adds up to 80 marks, which is 20% of the study score. Unit 4, school assessed coursework, 10% of the study score. So in Unit 4, you just need to assess a written analysis out of 20 marks, and that contributes to 10% of the study score. And then whopping 70% is actually externally assessed. So the end of year written exam is 20%, and that EAT composition folio is 50%. That's what it looks like. It's probably actually easy to read, but I couldn't fit it all on one page. So that's from the study design. It's the same thing, but you've all read that, or if not, you're going to go and read that. And that's Unit 4, internal assessment. So do you want to talk about that, Keelan? Because this is from the study design, the EAT.
Okay, so just with the EAT, that is their major composition. The big probably change is in that is it's just gone up a little bit in time limit, which is actually a good thing because it gets the kids to actually show and demonstrate a little bit more learning in there. And also it gives them time to develop an idea because obviously being 2 to 4 minutes earlier made it really difficult to show and demonstrate for all students fairly a lot of that creative process. So in the EAT, we're looking for the compositional devices and the development of the music elements and the documentation that supports the creative process. In the documentation, again, the kids have been doing this through their listening journal all the way through, or their compositional journal, all the way through, and in their compositional journal, they've got the dot points there that they're now putting into their work. Clearly outlined on the creative process, it legitimises their work and it tells us what to look for at what point in their composition. Sometimes you might see students that do lots of colours and all those sorts of things that totally double up in what they've told you and what they've put into their written composition. So they've got annotated works in there. That is doubling up on their word limitation. So they do have a word limitation in that documentation. So making sure they don't double up into the annotated works because those two things do correlate. And if they've already said it and told us where to find it, or you where to find it, more to the point, then we don't need to be told 3 times for the same thing. We want to use our words well. So we want to put something different in there in our language. So direct them, if they are putting annotations in their work, what to look for there that for some reason hasn't been put in the documentation. Okay, so the documentation and the annotation should support one another, not double up on work. That's just one sort of thing that students fall into the trap of doing. Also, as I said, their work's now longer, which means they can show and demonstrate these compositional devices and music elements a lot more successfully. So really encouraging them to develop an idea and document that. And what is just as important, and in some ways more important, the things they took out. So get them to document, I did this, and I did this, as I said earlier, and then it was just an explosion of sound and I hated it. So I did whatever and started again, because that is a true creative process. That is going to happen. And as I said, tell them not to throw that work away. They might use it in 30 years' time. But if they are starting again, they document that. Or, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily always encourage that, but, if they do, then get them to document that. So you can see what they're doing all the way through and how they're developing their understanding and gaining inner knowledge. Yeah.
At the end of your paper, it's only 60 minutes, and VCAR will tell you when it is.
It is significantly shorter than what it has been in the past, and the amount of work that is being asked to respond to.
So a bit of an overview of what's changed. But if you're not teaching it now, it probably doesn't make too much difference. But most things are actually pretty similar to the current study design. There's
just a lot of the style gone.
Yeah, lots of definitions at the start, which is helpful. Composition exercises and documentation is internally assessed for Unit 3. Thumbs up on that. New time limit for the EAT, 4 to 5 minutes. Make sure you've got one studied work in Unit 3 Outcome 2, which is Australian post-1990. There's this thing in the current style and composition course called contextual issues. It's in Outcome 2 that seems to be gone. Assessment weighting has changed. We sort of spoke about all of that. I had some questions in case nobody else came with any questions. Has anyone got any questions?
So my question is focusing on the door kind of work. Would you explore a range of styles like, say, rock and like stuff, even though they're applying to door? Would you focus more on like electronic music?
They will still have to respond to some of that music in their written exam, so they would still explore some of those techniques and musical elements, devices that have been used in different genres, because they're going to have to respond to them as well. So whilst it's not going to be as relevant to, well, certain parts may certainly cross over into their final Unit 4 composition, they will have to then respond to other works as well.
And more to the point, music is music is music. It's just a different accent. They may not necessarily be interested in the sounds of the Baroque period, but at the same time I wasn't really interested in algebra. But it's an important part of maths curriculum and maths thinking, so it's worth spending some time.
In Unit 3, currently, the two short works is 16 bars or 30 seconds. The new one, it says two short. How long do they have to be? And what is meant by sketch? How detailed is a sketch? Do you hand in a sketch that's just an idea, or does it have to be more detailed?
That information, I believe, is still coming out, and you will be provided with that information. And Tim, if you want to respond, you're welcome to. But the other thing is you are going to be the person assessing that now. So once the criteria comes out where you've got your actual assessment rubrics and descriptors, that will guide you to how to develop those sketches and how to assess them, because it's now going into the coursework.
Yeah.
Sorry, that perhaps carries on a little bit from the previous question about using door. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about the idea of manipulation as a composition as opposed to original input of data. So I'm talking here about loops, stems, things that can be digitally altered, and so therefore perhaps a legitimate compositional process, but that the original source material is perhaps not original. Is that what I'm saying about that? I mean, what are your thoughts around that? I mean, is that...
It's really interesting, isn't it? And it is really tricky. The biggest thing that you can do in that setting, and I'm with the new study design, I'm not necessarily even unsure if there's a place for that in inquiry. Because inquiry might be the exact place that you would explore that type of, that genre of music and that style of composition. And I think possibly more successfully than here. Because in here you are referring back to a set criteria and you are getting assessed and marked on that criteria. So if your particular compositional style doesn't allow you to access the highest marks, it may be somewhere that it sits in inquiry where you're still doing lots of composition and that you can actually access those marks in a different manner.
Yeah.
It may be. We're just waiting for those last few things to come out.
I mean,
And I'm not quite sure either, but I do believe that that's probably, at this point, until we get the final, the actual descriptors out, that will determine the best place for that style of composition.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of students who've done it,
Yeah.
where they've blended samples that it's indistinguishable. Oh my goodness. Thank you. From the original file, the way that they've manipulated it and used it basically as a sound bed underneath original content. It's pretty cool.
I mean, I haven't faced the issue. It just occurs to me because I've always presented the thing. It's a little bit like what you're saying. I've always presented it as a commission. It's like you guys are commissioned to actually fulfil certain things, and you sort of get paid in marks, Yeah. So therefore, I'm loving the creativity, but maybe you're not fulfilling the commission. So that's another way of thinking about that. Sort of trying to get or focus the work, perhaps.
What's the scope with lyrics at all? Is there any opportunity for people to write pop songs or anything?
There's a
like
lot
that?
of that presented in the current study design.
And is the lyrics, like the content of the lyrics or anything, taken into consideration? Because it's obviously probably not maybe fitting into the repetition or maybe...
Well, it does in its form and structure, because
Yeah.
generally if there's lyrics, there's normally chorus, verse, bridge, that sort of thing. So you're looking at different elements.
But would the content of the lyrics be the same, like if they just hummed versus if they wrote a love ballad or something?
Again, it comes down to what the criteria is. So if they're humming, I think there's two things there. They could be humming and writing for hums that are in a really deep sort of rhythmical and harmonic texture. So they're accessing the same marks.
Yeah.
If it's a single melody line with lyrics, well, they're writing now lyrics as well as a melody line that supports those things work well together, and they have to work well together or they're not successful. So they're actually going to be still fulfilling criteria. So the hum versus the lyrics doesn't come into it. It's how well they manipulate the elements to get those marks.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I've just got a practical question. Is there a word count for the documentation?
Yes.
We don't know what that is for next year, but there is currently.
Tim might know that.
No, I don't, but I mean, at the moment it's 1,100 words for
Correct.
documentation.
It-
But I don't think the actual decision's been made on.
I don't think that'll change terribly much. If anything, it should probably go up a little bit because the time of the composition's gone up.
Cool. Hey, a couple of resources on the way out the door. Worth having on your bookshelf. Listening Beyond Hearing, the analysis book from Jenny Gillen. It's got some useful stuff in it. Decoding Sound from Deborah Smith. Useful stuff. The old Appreciation of Music by Kamian. It's also good for propping your laptop up in a remote learning scenario. Your colleagues and your students. I'm always gobsmacked by the level of knowledge. As niche as it may be, they'll be really passionate about something.
Can I add to your list there, James, and put the Australian Music Centre?
Oh, of
Yes,
course.
absolutely.
Particularly for Unit 3, looking at...
Actually,
that's a new field
Thank you.
too, about who's writing music in this country since
It-
1990.
it'll fulfil
There are
the
hundreds.
Australian composition thing, and it will also, it comes with great teaching resources if you're not already using it, that is, but it does, it's very well outlined and will fulfil a few things here for you as well.
It's also a fantastic organisation that can put you in touch with people.
Yeah.
So if you want to have composers, as James was mentioning with VCASS, having this wonderful opportunity to connect students with real people doing things, it's a great organisation and they contact you.
Or given that post 1990 Australian, they're probably still alive, you could actually talk to
In contact.
the person who wrote the thing. We had Carl Vine via Skype, Google Meets, whatever you want to use these days. Amazing.
That's us, we've gone over. So please feel free to email us, it's on the presentation, or to Marg if you've got further questions. But thanks guys for coming, and go teach it because it's a great subject.